Welcome back to NetLab 05, Adding and Managing Virtual Hardware. This is Section 2 or Part 2, Create and Add Virtual Hard Disks to a Virtual Machine, and I'm Richard Golson. I'm going to walk you through this. Alright, so in the previous task, we took a look at the Photon 1 virtual machine and its hardware configuration. In this task, we're actually going to create those virtual disks, and we're going to compare thin and thick provision disks in the process. So you can see here that we're going to be opening up the edit settings window for the Photon 1 virtual machine. So I'll go ahead and right click on that and click on edit settings and allow that to load. As it's gathering the information, it starts displaying it on screen. Now, with the virtual machine running, notice that some configurations cannot be changed. Others can be added to. So what we're going to be doing is adding a hard disk. We could also add a network adapter and other different devices, but you'll note that CPU, memory cannot be changed. So let's go ahead and take care of this now. We're going to go ahead and hit Add Hard Disk, and we'll select New Standard Hard Disk. Now we're getting a nice big yellow warning message. And this appears when we add a new disk, and that new disk, the default size of that new disk exceeds capacity of available space in that data store. So essentially it's saying, look, that data store that you've defined datastore.1 as the location for this disk just doesn't have enough capacity. It only has 8.73 gigabytes available on that. Now, we could just try changing it to thin provision instead of thick, which means that we wouldn't use full 16 gigabytes. If I select thin provision, you'll notice that it's just giving me a warning now. It's going to allow me to do this if I wanted to, but the warning is that at some point, because I've overcommitted, I could run into a real problem with my virtual machine if it in a short span of time actually exceeded what was available on that data store. And in exceeding that capacity, I could get virtual machine errors. The operating system of the virtual machine would run into issues because it wouldn't necessarily know that it was out of disk space. According to the virtual machine, let's say that once we hit 9 gigabytes, we fill up that disk with 9 gigabytes of data, we've exceeded capacity. The operating system of that virtual machine would still believe that it had 7 gigabytes left. It would see that it had 7 gigabytes left based upon this value, but the reality is it didn't have any space left. You'd start getting errors. So we want to avoid doing that whenever possible. So try to tune these to make them match up to the reality of the situation. So I'll go ahead and change this to 1 gigabyte. And you'll notice that little message goes away. That's great. Now, let's go ahead and close that one up. And before we save this setting, let's add another hard disk. We're going to make a different type of hard disk. Notice that we're getting the same kind of message here. So we're going to go with the same size, but this time we're going to leave it, or we're going to set it to thick provisioned eagerly zeroed, which means that in this case, it's going to write zeros to that full 1 gigabyte disk. And so that disk is going to be full at the time that it's created. It's a pretty simple setting. And this can be really useful. Using thick provision disks can actually be very useful because it sets aside the space right off the bat. We'll go ahead and save that. Now, if I come down here to my hardware configuration, I'll just scroll down and take a look here. You can see that we have the 2 new disks. So let me go ahead and expand hard disk 2 and hard disk 3. Note that both of those are located on data store 1. By the way, if we expand hard disk 1, we can see that's also located on data store 1. So here we can see the name of the file. That's my hard disk file, my VMDK file. And here is the other VMDK file that I've got created on here as well. The numbers don't quite match up with what we see here, but that's okay. Now, notice the capacity is the same, but the difference here is this is thin provisioned and this one is thick provisioned. It says no to thin provisioning. Okay, at this stage, we're going to go ahead and leave off on this video, and we're going to take a look at differentiating that thin and thick provision by looking at their files. We'll see you then.